There are moments in television that the cameras aren't fully prepared to capture. Not explosions. Not scandal in the traditional sense. Something quieter. Something more unsettling. A man sitting on the most famous sofa in British entertainment, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and the easy charm of Britain's most beloved host, and being unable to feel any of it. What happened on the set of the Graham Norton show that Friday night wasn't a fight. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't even, by most standards, particularly dramatic. It was something far more revealing. Britain's favorite Irish host asked a prince a simple question. And what followed? The silences, the deflections, the moment Harry stood up and walked toward the door, told a story that no documentary, no memoir, no Oprah interview had ever quite managed to tell. This is that night. This is that story. The Graham Norton Show had been a British institution since 2007. 17 years. Over 500 episodes. Every kind of guest imaginable, Hollywood royalty, actual royalty, politicians with skeletons still rattling in their closets, pop stars in the middle of very public unravelings. Graham had seen it all, charmed them all, extracted things from all of them they hadn't planned to share. His method was deceptively simple. Self-deprecating Irish wit. Genuine warmth underneath the teasing. Wine. Always wine. And that smile. The one that said, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm going to make you laugh, and in laughing, you're going to tell me everything. It had worked for 17 years. The red sofa had held presidents and dames, Oscar winners and tabloid disasters. And no matter who sat on it, the formula held. The lights go up, the audience laughs, and by the end of the hour, everyone feels slightly better about the human race. That Friday night, the energy in the studio was its usual electric self. The audience was ready. The crew was ready. The cameras were steady and warm. And then Prince Harry arrived. He came with a security detail that felt, to those in the studio, slightly excessive for a BBC chat show. Multiple guards. Handlers. Someone whose sole visible purpose appeared to be looking perpetually concerned. The energy they brought with them was not the energy of celebrity preparation. It was the energy of bracing for impact. Harry walked onto the set, shook Graham's hand briefly, not warmly, briefly, and settled onto the red sofa with a posture that could only be described as controlled. Not relaxed, controlled. Graham, a professional to his marrow, launched into his usual opening charm. Prince Harry, welcome to the show. Graham, Harry replied. Graham raised an eyebrow at the audience, letting the word land. Oh, we're being formal. I'll try to warm you up. I've got wine. We've got stories. This is supposed to be fun. I'm here for conversation, Harry said. Conversation with alcohol, Graham replied, turning to reach for a glass. That's our specialty. When Harry declined the wine, requested water instead, Graham did what Graham always does with an unexpected situation. He turned it into a joke. Water. On my show. This is unprecedented. Even the Archbishop of Canterbury had a cheeky glass. The audience laughed. Harry did not. And right there, in that small, almost imperceptible non-laugh, the tone of the entire evening was established. Graham settled into his rhythm. 17 years of instinct taking over. So, he said, that lilt in his voice, that warmth in every syllable. What wind blew you back to our shores? It was the question every person in Britain had been asking. Harry had spent years publicly describing his inability to visit the UK, citing security concerns, legal disputes, what he had once called an establishment stitch-up. And yet here he was, in the flesh, on a BBC sofa, apparently safe. Circumstances evolved, Harry said. Graham paused just for a beat, the pause of a man choosing his next word very carefully. Evolved, he repeated. That's one word for it. Another word might be convenient. He let that sit. You said the establishment was blocking you. Now the establishment is apparently helping. Either they changed or you changed your story. Which is it? The situation was genuinely complicated. And there it was. The first of many words that Graham would spend the entire evening gently dismantling. Complicated. Was it? Graham asked, his smile never leaving his face. Because from outside, it looked like you blamed your dad, blamed the home office, blamed everyone, and now suddenly it's all fine. If I blamed my mom for something publicly and then showed up at Christmas, she'd have questions. Does your dad have questions? The audience laughed, nervously. Harry didn't. Graham moved methodically. Not cruelly, not even particularly aggressively, but with the quiet persistence of someone who had noticed something and refused to look away. He pointed out that Harry's family visit, described as being about the Invictus Games, was a full year ahead of the games themselves. He noted that this visit included Meghan and the children Archie and Lilibet, making their first trip to the UK in 4 years. He observed, almost gently, that this was rather a lot of commitment for a countdown event. Family considerations, Harry said. Family considerations, Graham repeated, leaning forward with the air of someone who had just been handed an unexpected gift. Now we're getting somewhere. Tell me, the family you've been estranged from, or the family you brought with you? Both, Harry said. Potentially. The word hung in the air of that studio like smoke. Harry had said it himself. Graham turned to his audience with the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe his luck. Potentially, he repeated. So this is exploratory, testing the waters, seeing if Britain still bites. We don't bite, by the way. We mostly just make tea and complain about the weather. We're harmless. But the laughter that followed felt like it had an edge to it now, because the questions were moving somewhere, and everyone in that studio could feel it. Your brother, Graham said, his tone adopting the casual air of a man bringing up the weather. William. Reports say he's not thrilled about this visit. Bolted shut was one description of his door. I won't discuss private family matters. The line landed in the studio like a stone into still water. Graham let the ripples settle for exactly 1 beat. You've discussed them extensively, he said. Books, documentaries, that Oprah interview we all pretended not to watch but definitely watched at least twice. He tilted his head. Private went out the window years ago, didn't it? This is different. Different how? Graham asked. You described him losing his temper. You mentioned physical altercations. You questioned his choices, his marriage, a brief, deliberate pause. Hairline. Now he won't see you, and suddenly it's private. His voice remained absolutely, infuriatingly warm. The context was important, Harry said. The context, Graham replied, was book sales. Silence. Let's be honest with each other. The context was a Netflix deal. The context was interviews that paid quite well. Now that the consequences have arrived, the family estrangement, the bolted doors, suddenly context matters differently. Harry's hand tightened around his glass of water. His jaw, which had been set from the beginning, tightened further. I told my truth, he said, and Graham Norton, with 17 years of this behind him, let his smile broaden by exactly 1 degree. My truth, he said softly. That phrase again. What followed was a masterclass in gentle, devastating deconstruction. Graham didn't mock the phrase. He examined it, turned it over, held it up to the studio light. My truth. His truth. Everyone has their truth now. It's very convenient. He paused. My truth is that I'm devastatingly handsome and everyone finds me irresistible. Doesn't make it accurate. Though I wish it did. The audience laughed, grateful, almost relieved. Harry did not. In Ireland, Graham said, his accent thickening just slightly, the way it always did when he was making a point he cared about. We'd say you made your bed. I know what it means, Harry said. Good. Then you understand why the bed might be uncomfortable now. He leaned forward. You criticized your family publicly for years. They're not rushing to welcome you with open arms and a fruit basket. That's not cruelty. That's natural consequence. There were reasons for what I shared. There are always reasons, Graham replied. The question is whether the reasons justified the damage. From outside, it looks like the damage was considerable and the reasons were commercial. He said it without malice, without performance, just plainly. as a statement of observable fact. And somehow that was worse. Graham moved on to the divorce rumors, which had been circulating widely enough that Harry's team had felt compelled to issue formal denials. Multiple statements. Something that Graham noted with characteristic gentleness was quite a lot of effort for what Harry had called fiction. When my rumors circulate, Graham said, I just let them float. You issued statements. What needed stating so urgently? False information spreads. False information spreads when there's oxygen, Graham replied. What oxygen exists in your marriage that's feeding these flames? Because these flames are quite persistent. Harry's jaw tightened. Our marriage is private. Graham paused. Let the words sink into the room. Your marriage, he said carefully, has been a Netflix documentary. It's been magazine covers. It's been the subject of countless interviews you've given. He spread his hands. The privacy ship hasn't just sailed. It circumnavigated the globe, stopped for tea in several ports, and returned with souvenirs. The audience laughed. Harry didn't. That was different, Harry said. Different because you controlled it, Graham replied. When you choose to share, it's storytelling. When others choose to observe, it's invasion. The principle is selective, isn't it? He gave Harry a moment. Then he said, let me try something different. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer without using the words private, complicated, tabloid, or truth. Ready? Harry stared at him. Why are you actually here in Britain on my show? What do you want? What followed was not a pause. It was a silence. The kind of silence that fills a room differently than noise does, that takes up space, displaces air, makes the cameras feel suddenly very close. Harry said nothing. Graham watched him for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter than it had been all evening. See, that's fascinating, he said. You've done dozens of interviews explaining your story, hours of documentaries, hundreds of pages of memoir. But when someone asks what you actually want, you've got nothing. He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like a man noticing something sad. Either you don't know, Graham said, or you won't say. Neither is particularly encouraging. I want to show my children their heritage, Harry finally said. Their heritage, Graham replied, that you've spent years criticizing. You've monetized complaints about their heritage, Graham said. You've described it as toxic, suffocating, and damaging. That heritage. Harry moved forward slightly in his seat, a small gesture but one the cameras caught. That's unfair, he said. That's accurate, Graham replied. You've made millions describing this heritage as harmful. Now you want your children to experience it. Pick one. Either it's harmful enough to leave or it's valuable enough to share. He held Harry's gaze. The contradiction is doing a lot of heavy lifting. The room was absolutely still. Your children, Graham continued, his voice softening again. Not retreating, but shifting. Archie and Lilibet. They're 7 and 5 now. They've been to Britain exactly once in 4 years. They've met their grandfather, the king, exactly once. How did that happen? Security concerns. Security concerns that are now resolved, Graham said, which means they were either resolvable all along, or never as serious as claimed. You visited Britain multiple times alone. You found security adequate for yourself, just not for them. The risk assessment. The risk assessment that changed the moment you wanted to attend Invictus events, Graham said. Remarkable timing. Either the assessments were wrong before or they're wrong now. Which is it? I won't detail security arrangements. Graham paused. His voice, when it returned, was very quiet. You detailed them extensively in court, he said, and lost multiple times. The details are public record. What I'm asking is why the children paid the price for a dispute you couldn't win. Your father, Graham said. King Charles. He's had cancer. He's 77. He's reportedly trying to reach out. What's actually happening there? We communicate, Harry said. Graham nodded slowly. We've established, he said, that communicate is doing a lot of work in this conversation. He paused. Let me be more specific. When did you last have a genuine conversation with your father? Not a briefing. Not a logistics call. A conversation where you talked about feelings, family, the future. The silence returned. It lasted longer this time. Graham watched it. The silence is instructive, he said finally, gently. Most people can remember their last real conversation with their parents. You can't access it. Either it hasn't happened, or it was so long ago it's lost. Our relationship is complicated. Graham smiled. Not unkindly, but with a recognition that the word had been there all along, waiting to be said. There's complicated again, he said. I asked you not to use that word. It's become a shield. Every difficult question gets complicated thrown at it. Complicated isn't an answer. It's avoidance wearing a fancy hat. Graham Norton had interviewed hundreds of people in 17 years. Politicians whose careers were ending. Celebrities whose marriages had just collapsed publicly. People in the middle of genuine crises. They had all, eventually, found a moment to laugh. He leaned forward now and looked at Harry directly. Not performing, not teasing, just looking. I've interviewed hundreds of people on this sofa, he said. Politicians, criminals, people who've done genuinely terrible things. Most of them can eventually laugh at themselves. Find some humor in their situation. Acknowledge their own absurdity. He paused. You can't. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. And somehow that made it sharper. Every question about your choices becomes an attack on you. Every observation becomes victimization. Every attempt at humor gets met with walls. He shook his head. I'm genuinely trying to make this enjoyable for everyone. You're making it impossible. Your questions are hostile, Harry said. My questions are cheeky, Graham replied. There's a difference. Hostile would be insults. What I'm doing is pointing out contradictions with a smile. The contradictions are yours. The smile is mine. It's how I've always worked. He gestured around the studio. Jennifer Lawrence sat on this sofa and laughed when I teased her about falling at the Oscars. Dame Judi Dench laughed when I joked about her memory. Hugh Grant laughed when I brought up his worst reviews. That's what happens here. We laugh together. His voice dropped. When someone can't laugh at themselves, there's usually a reason. Either the ego is too fragile to handle examination, or the story they're telling themselves can't survive humor. He looked at Harry. Which is it for you? My experiences are serious, Harry said. All experiences are serious, Graham replied. And also slightly ridiculous. That's life. That's being human. The combination is what makes us interesting. You've removed the ridiculous entirely. You've become entirely serious, entirely wounded, entirely victim. It's very one note, and frankly, it's exhausting. Harry reached for his jacket. The studio, 500 people, 17 years of live television muscle memory, cameras trained by professionals who'd seen everything, went completely still. I expected better from British television, Harry said. Graham looked at him for a long moment. British television, he replied. Expected better from a British prince. We're all disappointed, but I suspect we'll recover faster. Harry paused at the studio door. History will vindicate me, he said. And Graham Norton, with the composure of a man who has spent 17 years saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, raised his glass. History, he said quietly, will note that you walked off a chat show because an Irish comedian made gentle observations about your contradictions. History will note that you couldn't laugh at a single joke in an hour of conversation. History will note that you came to Britain claiming to want reconciliation, and couldn't even handle a Friday night sofa conversation. He took a sip. History judges how people handle uncomfortable moments with grace. You handled this by leaving. That's the history being written right now on camera. The door closed. The studio held its breath. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Graham Norton turned to his audience with an expression of such extravagant bewilderment that the room couldn't help itself. It laughed. Well, he said, that was different. He looked around at his crew, his producers, the faces of 500 people trying to process what they just witnessed. Shall we get the other guests back? I promised to be nicer to them. A pause. Though to be fair, I was quite nice to him. He just didn't notice. The laughter that followed was real and relieved and slightly disbelieving, the laughter of people who just watched something that defied easy categorization. But Graham wasn't finished. He sat down his drink. He addressed the camera directly, and for a moment the jokes fell away. I want to explain what just happened, he said, because it's rather remarkable. He sat quietly for a beat before continuing. I've been doing this show for 17 years, over 500 episodes. I've had every kind of guest imaginable. Nervous ones, defensive ones, people going through actual crises, people whose careers were ending, people whose marriages were collapsing in real time. They still engaged. They still found moments of humor. They still participated in the conversation. He shook his head. What I experienced tonight was different. Every question about his choices became victimhood. Every joke became attack. Every observation became hostility. In 17 years, I've never met someone so completely unable to laugh at anything, including himself. And I've had politicians on this sofa. The audience laughed softly, warmly, like people grateful to be reminded they were on a comedy show. The frustrating thing, Graham continued, is that I wasn't being cruel. I asked about his UK visit, a legitimate question. I asked about his family, a legitimate question. I asked about the contradictions in his public statements. Legitimate observations. Those are the questions any British audience would want answered. He looked at the camera. He's been here criticizing everything British for years. The institution, the media, the family, the country that made him a prince. Now he's back asking for welcome. We welcomed him with questions. That's how conversation works. That's how British conversation has always worked. He straightened in his chair. He wanted warmth without examination. That's not warmth. That's capitulation. And this show doesn't do capitulation. It does wine and jokes and honesty. Sometimes uncomfortable honesty, but always with affection underneath. For Graham Norton, the interview became an unexpected demonstration of what happens when British wit meets an armor that was never designed to be laughed at. 17 years of charming celebrities, politicians, royals, rock stars, Oscar winners. And none of that experience could find a way through defenses built entirely on the premise that the world was watching, judging, and waiting to attack. For Prince Harry, the evening was catastrophic in a way no other interview had quite managed to be. Graham Norton wasn't hostile journalism. He wasn't a tabloid trap. He was the nation's favorite Friday night companion. Warm, funny, genuinely beloved. A man whose entire career was built on making people feel safe enough to be real. And Harry couldn't do it. Couldn't laugh. Couldn't engage. Couldn't accept a single joke in an hour of genuine, warm, characteristically charming conversation. Being unable to laugh with Graham Norton, walking out on the friendliest sofa in British television, exposed something that no PR strategy, no crisis team, no carefully managed documentary could address. The contrast told its own story. Graham made jokes. Harry couldn't laugh. Graham asked about contradictions. Harry called it attack. Graham offered 17 years of the warmest conversation on British television. Harry couldn't accept a single moment of it. And in that inability, in that devastating, quietly heartbreaking failure to find even one moment of shared humanity, everything anyone needed to understand was right there on camera. Some people laugh at themselves because they've learned that life, for all its seriousness, is also faintly ridiculous. And that acknowledging the ridiculousness is what keeps us connected to each other. Others prove, in the full glare of studio lights, that they've forgotten how. Graham offered the red sofa. Harry couldn't stay. There's a version of this story where the night ends differently. Where a prince, carrying genuine pain and real grievances, sits down on that famous sofa and finds, in the warmth and wit of the world's most charming host, a small, unexpected moment of relief. Where the armor comes down just slightly, where a joke lands, where something human breaks through. That version didn't happen. What happened instead was a door closing, and a man on the other side of it, glass raised, sang quietly to a camera. That's the history being written right now. 17 years, 500 episodes, Britain's most beloved host. And he couldn't laugh at a single joke. That's the whole story.